This is OpenAI 101, and I am Michelle Solicito. So what is OpenAI? OpenAI is a company and they specialize in AI research and development. They have a mission to make artificial general intelligence that benefits all of humanity. A lot of people like them because their mission is so great, and they have this idea of making humanity better through AI, and they're especially keen to mitigate the risks. They are looking into lots of ways of reducing that risk. Sam Altman, who is kind of the linchpin of this company, and you may have heard he recently got fired and went to Microsoft and came back and so on. He is seen as really key to the future of OpenAI and actually to AI generally. A lot of people in the business see him as the leader that everybody else will follow. So keep an eye on this company, OpenAI. You've probably heard of them and you've probably heard of their models and so on, and we'll talk about those in a minute. So the OpenAI models are the thing that a lot of people are talking about right now. So GPT or ChatGPT you may have heard of. So GPT-4 is kind of the model, the most recent model that a lot of this stuff is working on. ChatGPT uses the GPT-4 model in order to generate content. And so, for example, you might type in, write me an essay on the history of America, and GPT-4 is at the back of that chat and is the engine behind it to bring back that essay written about US history and so on. There are a number of models. So you've probably heard of the GPT, as we said. There's different versions of that. There's also DALL-E, which is a model that is well known for its image creation and editing options. It's very good at creating fantastic images from a short description, pretty much. And there's others here like Whisper and so on. There's a number of models that OpenAI are responsible for. Now, OpenAI in the future, I think, is going to be more in alignment with Microsoft because of that Sam Altman relationship with Microsoft. But we don't know that, and we're looking to see. However, OpenAI is on Azure, a primary set of models on Azure. So just watch that space, watch the Microsoft relationship. So typically the models that OpenAI Group have created, they understand language very well. They have been trained with just about all of the content on the internet these days, so that they can learn patterns in language and how people form sentences and how people ask for things and how people answer things, how people write essays and content and so on. So they've been trained on a lot of information. They're very data hungry, these models. The more data they can use to base their generative content on, the better they get. So data is really key to all of these models, as it is with all AI and ML. So make sure you get your data right before you train one of these models. Generative AI generates relevant items using that language to give it things like instructions to generate images, generate documents, generate programs, generate articles. So example, you can type into ChatGPT, I want a Python program to add 2 numbers or to work out the nth digit of pi, that kind of thing, and it will literally come back with a program that does that. And the way it generates that is partly templates based on all of the Python programs it's found out there. It kind of generates a template and then it puts in variables according to what you've asked for it to do, based on all of the patterns it's found out there in Python programs that do a similar kind of thing. So that's kind of how it works. That's also how it works in terms of articles and so on. It kind of comes up with a basic structure for an article, like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it has this kind of templated architecture that helps it generate content, and then it puts in the content based on all of that data that it's got from the internet. So here's a very simple example of how you can use the OpenAI model, the basic part of the OpenAI model, and you can create your own assistant based on that model. So you create your own client that's a chat, and it basically can add to the model that is in OpenAI. So you can add your own stuff to that model. So just to give you an idea of how this all works in the cloud, OpenAI is a model that is a set of models that are available in Azure, for example. So Azure OpenAI provides the ability to deploy these OpenAI models on Azure cloud. So that's ChatGPT and Whisper and DALL-E and so on, and different versions of them too. Tight integration with the Azure platform, so it's very easy to use them in conjunction with other Azure components. You can manage the identity through Azure AD and so on, so that's really integral to this. The idea of permissions and so on, also your tenant, all of that is around this whole OpenAI model. There's an OpenAI Studio in Azure, which is an easy way to get started with OpenAI. So you can use it to summarize text, to classify text. You can use natural language and make it go to SQL, so you can transform natural language into SQL. You can create new product names, so you can create new models or new chats and so on, and expand the basic OpenAI. So these are all things you can do in Azure with OpenAI. So we're going to go through how to create your own OpenAI model in Azure. So we're going to base it upon the OpenAI model of choice. So we might choose ChatGPT 4 or ChatGPT 3.5, for example, or you might choose DALL-E or what have you. You're going to use that to create, in this case, we're going to create a chatbot service or deployment, but you could use it to create other types of services too. Then one of the things you can do with that is you can train the model with your own data to extend that chatbot, that model, to respond to different questions that it doesn't already respond to. We're going to go step by step in how you would do this in Azure. So if you wanted to use OpenAI within Azure Portal, you just go to the home page in portalazure.com and you click on Create a Resource. In the search bar, just type Azure OpenAI and it will come up in the list below, and you click on that. Click on Create, and what you're doing when you click on Create is you're creating your own OpenAI model, basically the basic OpenAI model. So here you have to enter basic information like your subscription name. So that's kind of how it's going to be billed. So your subscription will pay for this model. And your resource group, so that's a group of resources into which you have to put any Azure component. It has to be sort of within a resource group. So if you don't already have a resource group, just create a new one here. As with most components in Azure, you have to choose a region, and a name for your project and a pricing tier. So in this case, we're going to choose standard SO. And when you click on next, that will create. So that creates an OpenAI basic model for you with that name that you gave it in that region, paid for by your subscription. Just a note, as just before you create the OpenAI model, you do have the option to download the automation template. So that is really like a set of instructions to Azure of how to create this model. So if you wanted to download that and reuse it for other models, you can do. It's a little bit like Terraform, but for this purpose. It basically allows you to create resources without having to go through the whole click ops and the selection options. You can just do it programmatically. Once you click on create, it will take a few minutes to create your model. And then you can go to this URL, oai.azure.com, to see your model. So in this case, you'll probably only have one model, but if you'd created many, they will be listed there. You have the option in oai.azure.com to create a chat playground, which is just like a test bed where you can play around with the chat and learn from it and work out how it works. A completions playground, which again, it allows you to play with completions models, so how it should respond to questions in effect. Or you can bring in your own data to supplement the model and improve the model. Always, if you're bringing in your own data, make sure that data is good data. Be very careful about the data you bring in. I've got other training courses about how to make sure that data is good and pure and gold before you start bringing it into something like this. One of the things you have to watch out for is bias. Some people have expanded the OpenAI model with data that has a bias towards a particular population, like a white population as opposed to a black population, and then the results from it are biased towards the white population, and it almost looks racist with some of the responses that it gives because of the data that was used to train the model. So always be careful about the type of data that you're bringing in. Make sure the data is good data, make sure it's representative of your audience, of what you want to generate on the outside of this model, and so on. Very important. Data is so key to AI. So just in case someone doesn't know, what is a prompt and what is a completion? A prompt is usually what the text the user would type in order to get the model to do something, like a command or a question, and so on. Completions are the responses or outputs from the model in response to prompts. Usually these are associated with one another, but it gets very complex because different languages, different ways of saying the prompt, different ways of constructing that sentence, different semantics, and so on. They all should lead to the same kind of completion. And sometimes slight changes in the prompt change the completion. So this is a very simple prompt here that you might ask the model to count to 5 in a for loop. And its very simple completion might be like this one here, but you might say in your prompt, use Python to do it, or use C# to do it, or use Java to do it. And then the completion would be different because it's in a different language, and so on. So there's different ways of asking for the same information in different responses, or different completions would be the response. It depends on context as well. Sometimes some of these models take into account other questions you've asked before, so other prompts that you've typed before, as context for the completion. So if you're asking for an article or a website content kind of structure, or a thesis, other questions or other prompts that you've put beforehand might improve the thesis or improve the article as it goes along, that kind of thing. It depends how the model works, but prompts and completions are not really as straightforward and easy as it sounds here, but this is the simplest way to understand them. So once you have your model, you can create deployments. So that's deployments of your model. So you can create different types of deployment and use them in different ways, and we will see that as we go along. So you will have one deployment here already because you've created that one, and we'll go ahead and see what other models you can have, and so on. Deployments really provide an endpoint for the OpenAI kind of API almost, for you to call that model with your extra data built into that model, and so on. There's version handling and so on involved in that too. So in order to create a new deployment, you're going to select the model that you just created, and you're going to create a GPT-35 Turbo model in this case. and give the deployment a name and click on Create. Set the advanced options, things like content filter should be default in this case. Set the rate limit to about 30K, something like that, and then click Create to create the deployment. It may take a little while to create the deployment, but then you should see this message, successfully created deployment, on the right top there. So in this case, we created a ChatGPT deployment. So you can test that out by typing in user messages and getting responses to that. And you can do some configuration as well, and we'll talk about that. For now, we're going to leave the system message as is. In the configuration section, we're going to change to our deployment, the one we just created, if it's not already selected. And now we're going to start interacting and ask it a question. So just to summarize what we just did, we created our own base model within Azure using GPT 3.5 Turbo OpenAI model. We created a chat deployment of that model. We can now interact with that chat deployment in the playground within Azure Studio, AI Studio. We can also use an endpoint to interact with that model programmatically, so we can write almost like API calls to interact with that model. We can also add our own data to the base model so that the chat box asks we can ask specific questions to the chatbot, and we want it to answer those questions. Just so you know, there are other technologies in the AI space in Azure. MLNet is a very highly used one, which supports image classification. VIT is used for vision transformation, and there are lots of other Azure AI services.